Good morning, this is Jim Williams with the Hurricane City Tropical Update for October 25th around 10 a.m. Here's the graphical tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center. We have Tropical Storm Tony in the far northeast Atlantic, and we have Hurricane Sandy moving into the Bahamas this morning, and the Bahamas should get whacked pretty good by this hurricane over the next 24 hours as it moves into the central Bahama Islands and the northwest Bahamas. Hurricane warnings are up. Now, there's already been fatalities, one death reported down in Jamaica. There may be more as the reports come out of East Cuba, as they were hit last night, and this was almost a Category 3 hurricane when it moved into East Cuba. But now all eyes are on the east coast of the United States, the Bahamas, and we'll see what happens over the next several days. So let's get to some of our images here. First of all, here's the upper-level winds from the University of Wisconsin showing very strong southwesterly and westerly winds up here around 60 to 70 knots north of Hurricane Sandy. And this should disrupt the circulation somewhat, and the forecast is for Sandy to begin to weaken as it gets into the Bahamas, but it still has a really good inner core structure, and it's a really well-established system. So even though it should start to come apart here slowly, it's still going to be a pretty intense hurricane through the central Bahama Islands. But this is going to have a huge factor on the future of Sandy, and I know that some of the global models are indicating that this is going to remain as a hurricane when it gets up in this North Atlantic region up here, but I'm beginning to have some doubts because of the fact that the wind shear is so high up there and the sea surface temperatures are very cold up when you get north of 35 degrees north. So we're going to keep an eye on this and see what happens when it gets up in the as off the east coast of the United States, and how the structure is on the system. But it may become a post-tropical hybrid, extratropical type system spread out and wrapped into a trough by the time it gets up that way. So it won't be a purely tropical system as we're seeing it right now. I went back and looked at all the history of this date where Sandy is right now. How many systems were right around where this system is right now around this time of the year? Well, there's been about 4 of them. We had a 1933 named storm go out into the Atlantic. We had a 1900 unnamed storm north going into the North Atlantic. We had Hurricane Noel up in here, which affected the Canadian Maritimes up here. And then we had a 1911 system in the Gulf of Mexico. So the trend here is basically northeast this time of the year. And this is another reason why I'm not biting too much on the fact that we're going to see a tropical storm or hurricane coming into the northeast. Again, we may see some sort of a hybrid type system spread out, wrapped in a cold front by the time it gets up that way, but there are some scenarios that could lead to a purely tropical system moving in, and we'll look at those in just a minute. But the history tells us northeast this time of the year. All right, here's the official forecast using the HurTrack program, showing the closest point of approach to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, 222 nautical miles. Again, this is as of the 5 a.m. advisory. New advisory should come out shortly. May shift just a little bit to the west, but basically around 200 miles, give or take, east of Cape Hatteras, because it's going to respond to the trough coming off the east coast, shove it out into the Atlantic, and then the thinking is that it's going to get wrapped in that trough and then circle back toward the coast with a bit of a high pressure to the north. But again, that remains to be seen what kind of a system we're going to have at that point. And then here is our closest point of approach to the northeast, the mid-Atlantic up into the New Jersey area. We're talking, again, a little over 200 miles off the coast, according to the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Again, this could shift a little bit further to the west, but the way it looks right now, the Hurricane Center seems to be biting on the best performer this year, and that's the GFS model, which takes whatever there is of this system as a big, broad, extratropical type system into the Canadian Maritimes, maybe Nova Scotia area, or maybe up into Maine in about 5 or 6 days. But the most important thing to note, well, before I get to that, here are all the models combined using the HurTrack program. We throw them all on there, and all the dates and times and everything. Here's what we have. You know, we have a spread all the way over here from the Delmarva Peninsula all the way up to Nova Scotia. So the models are pretty fairly spread, and there's a lot of disagreement as to what exactly is going to take place once this thing gets north of 35 north and how it's going to respond. Now here's the image I was going to talk to you about, the intensity models. And the best performing of all these models you see listed here is the GFDL model, and it's only been off by about 16 miles per hour. and that's the red one here. And if you look out 5 days, which is where landfall would take place, if it does go up towards Long Island or areas up in that area, would be 120 hours. You're talking a 40 to 50 mile an hour tropical storm by the time it gets up that way, because it's the sea surface temperature is just way too cold up there. The other models over here, in fact, the second best performer is the HWRF. That, on the other hand, has it ramping up and tapping into some of that baroclinic energy and turning this into like a 90 mile an hour system. So there is some uncertainty, and the other models here are pretty much in the middle, around 70 miles an hour at landfall up in the northeastern United States. Now here is the Euro model, and I know there's a big buzz on the internet about the Euro, and it's showing landfall in the mid-Atlantic coast here as a hurricane. But let's keep this in perspective as to what the intensity of this system may be. Again, cold sea surface temperature. I'll show you a map on that in just a minute. But system spreading out with a broad circulation. It's not going to be your typical tight wound hurricane moving in there, and they're going to have some gusts, possibly to hurricane strength. And we have to do no further than look back to last year, Hurricane Irene, and the system moved right up the coast, supposedly a Category 1 hurricane, although I still believe that it was never a hurricane when it moved up that way. You were hard-pressed to find any hurricane-force winds up there in the northeast. A lot of rain and flooding, and there's going to be tidal problems and surge and beach erosion. That's going to be the biggest problems with this system, if it even does take this course that the Euro is indicating. But again, most of the models are keeping it offshore and then eventually circling back, wrapping into a cold front as it heads back towards the northeastern United States. But it depends. A lot is uncertain as to how strong this system is going to be. But one thing is for certain, it will not be a fully warm core system where it's hurricane force winds down to the surface going into the northeast. This will be a spread out system that'll be more likely as a post-tropical type storm by the time, if it takes that long to get up there. And that's the other interesting aspect of this, is how long is it going to take to get up that way. Now here's our latest visible floater loop of Hurricane Sandy. You can see that the core of the hurricane is now back over the water, moving into the Bahamas. In fact, if you look at this visible shot, it looks like it's a little further further east than we were anticipating. The official forecast had it coming up something like this and then bending out, but we see it's already over here now. So might be more like the central Bahamas have to deal with this. Depends on how much of a bend back there is to the northwest as to how much the northwest Bahamas are going to be affected by this. But so far it's better news for the northwest Bahamas, although there's a ways to go yet on the future of this, is how much it's going to bend toward the United States. There's going to be a short period of time where a small, narrow ridge of high pressure is going to build to the north and steer it for about 24 to 36 hours, and then the cold front's going to whip off the United States and steer this thing off to the northeast. And then it all depends on how far offshore it stays the United States and how much it turns back towards the United States late in the period. All right, here is the HurTrack animation. Let's go ahead and show you that real quick. The entire course future forecast based on the National Hurricane Center forecast track. And you see our system coming up here through the Bahamas. You're going to give South Florida some gusts of 40 miles an hour or so. And it should give the whole entire southeastern United States gusts to around 40 or so, as the tropical storm force sustained wind field inside that yellow circle basically stays offshore. And then when it gets up near the North Carolina area, some of those sustained tropical storm force gusts may get onshore as it continues to stay offshore about 200 miles or so off Cape Hatteras. Again, this is based on the 5 a.m. And then there's that bend to the north, and the question is, what type of a system are we going to have by this time, and what are the impacts going to be to the northeast? And there's a lot of uncertainty here. Let me go ahead and switch sources and show you the best performing model. But before I do that, I want to remind you that Eleuthera Island, Bahamas here, click right next to the tracking chart, and you can get all the latest information from the Bahamas as it comes out. But here are the best performers on the Hurricane City model map. And the best performers, the red model, the HWRF, as I mentioned earlier, off by only about 69.4 miles, going out 120 hours. And that keeps it well offshore the United States. And we'll see if that HWRF falls in line with the GFDL, because there's a big spread in those two models. Tropical models are competing with each other, and they're seeing which one performs the best. So far, the HWRF has had a better track record on this system, and that takes it well offshore. Now, if you look at the best performing model, there it is, the HWRF model, and that clearly keeps this well off the coast of the United States. And then late in the period there, again, we're talking 5 days out, we see a bend back toward the northwest. But after 5 days, a lot of things could factor into the weakening of the system, including the cold sea surface temperatures. So let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. Let's go ahead and put up, let's just say Long Island, New York, in the search bar, right above the hurricane tracking chart, and we can zoom right in on Long Island, New York, and actually let's pan it out a little bit. And this is kind of neat because you can see the models right over your area too when you zoom in on these maps. But let's go ahead and let the sea surface temperature, actually I got to pull up a sea surface temperature map first, and then we'll zoom in and show you that the temperatures are right around in the 60s and even the upper 50s when you get up in this area, and it's impossible for a system to maintain tropical characteristics under those types of water temperatures. But as you can see, if you zoom in on Long Island, you can see that the water temperatures are warm enough right up to about North Carolina, and then when you get up north of there, you're talking 17, 18 degrees Celsius temperatures, which are way too cold for development of or maintaining a hurricane status of a system moving up. Well, this is taking a little too long to load. But anyway, use the temperature map there at Hurricane City, and you can zoom right in on your city or area, see what the water temperatures are offshore. Anyway, finally, let me just make a final note on this. This is not a panic situation. If you live in the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic coast, keep an eye on it. Pay attention to your local weather service office, what the advisories are for your area. Stay away from the coastal areas. There's going to be large waves, beach erosion, very high, strong, gusty winds on the coast, but this is not going to be a catastrophic event by any stretch. But keep an eye on it, and just keep in mind with Irene last year, and again, not all storms are the same, but this is not a major hurricane moving up into that area, so let's just try to keep it in perspective. And just stay calm, get all your loose objects or anything you think may need to be moved in a few days, get it in position to move it. And we'll keep track on this. I'll be back in a couple of days with another update, and we'll see where Sandy is at that time. Thank you again for visiting Hurricane City.